Good morning, my name is Rosatom, and it's my pleasure to see everybody who joins our discussion platform, Brain Hub, created by Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. Today it's day 573 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. It's year 10 of the war, and today we have invited you to present a study called Nuclear Prison, how Rosatom turned Europe's largest nuclear power plant into a torture chamber and how the world can't stop it. So today we will be talking about this study dedicated to the analysis of systemic abductions, torture and murders of the employees of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We will be talking about what was going on there and why it was all supported by Rosatom starting from March 2022. I would like to introduce our speakers today. They are Avramenko, Executive Director of Hounds. Also joining us is Dmytro Koval, Legal Director of Hounds, and Alexandra Romansova, Executive Director at the Center for Civil Liberties NGO. Good morning, dear friends. Mr. Roman, first question to you. Let's talk about the study, about the methodology, and about the facts that you were able to study within its framework. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. As it is known, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, or ZNPP, you will be hearing this acronym many times today, is the biggest nuclear facility in Europe. It is the property of Ukraine, and after the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the 27th of February 2022, Russian forces assaulted and took control over the territory of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant on the 11th of March. At least since that time we mark the period that Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants was controlled by the Russian corporation Rosatom, and all the events that were unfolding there were aware to the employees of Rosatom. And then President of Russian Federation Putin signed the decree which appropriated Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant by Russian Federation. The idea to write about what was going on in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, we came up with this idea in summer this year, a little bit earlier, and now we present the fundamental work of lawyers, researchers, journalists, thanks to work of whose the presentation of this study became possible. I would like to thank the denizens of Energodar, the courageous people who, regardless the risks to their life, who were staying in the occupied territories and were witnessing at the same time against their torturers, and whose witnesses you will be able to read as soon as you get access to the text of the study. Well, if I may ask a couple of words about the methodology, whom you were able to talk to, whom you were able to, whose reports you were able to study. Well, Hounds works for a number of years now, and we only work with verified data. We never work with rumors, and this is why it was so difficult to find and to work with the witnesses. This study included the evidences of 14 witnesses of the war crimes that were happening in the territory of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and it's a big number. The 14 reports that repeat the same patterns. I'm repeating myself, those evidences were given by the people who remain in the occupied territories so far, and as a result of interviewing of those 14 witnesses, we were able to identify the personal details of at least 30 people who were affected by different war crimes that were happening in the territory of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. We analyzed the pictures. People were sending us the pictures of bruises, of fractures. They were showing the devices that were used for torturing them. They were telling us about the locations where they were kept along with other witnesses. They were telling us about the places they can identify where people are buried who were intentionally tortured to death, either in the territory or beyond the territory of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. What events, what war crimes were documented in this study? I apologize. I have a lot of records here. So basically, what is their study about? It's aimed to draw attention to the events unfolding in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and at analyzing the violations of international humanitarian law. It establishes that Rosatom Corporation was exercising control over the nuclear power plant starting from 11th of March last year, and that the representatives of FSB performed violent abductions, torturing, intimidation of sexual violence of the employees of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The people were taken to forests and were forced to dig graves for themselves. They were intimidated that their families would be raped and killed. And it was happening at least with the awareness, most likely with the awareness of the representatives of Rosatom Corporation, or they may have been otherwise initiated and connived to by the representatives of Rosatom Corporation. The main task why it was all done, why all those actions were performed, such methods of influence were exercised over the representatives of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The goal of such actions were to make them sign the contracts with Rosatom so that they report about the condition of the devices in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and equipment to the representatives of Rosatom to make them more cooperative, so to say. Thank you very much, Ms. Alexandra. I would like to ask you a question. Why does the state corporation Rosatom is the entity that should be brought to responsibility for and to liability for what was done there? Well, first of all, we have to understand that it's a business structure. First of all, it's the corporation which has a transnational nature, because Rosatom does not only operate in the territory of Russian Federation, but they are very deeply integrated into the global corporate network of operation of any reactors and power system based on the nuclear power. This is why such corporation, on top of being the agency of Russian Federation, they are a part of a very strictly regulated corporate business that has their specific international law, international nuclear law. And in that law, a lot of attention is paid to the human factor. This is why the representatives of such facilities as the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is the biggest in our continent, every such employee is licensed according to the international standards. There are people responsible for issuing such license. For example, why Rosatom wants to sign the contracts with them? Because they are the part of the corporate systems all across the world. There are more than 30 facilities in other countries other than Russian Federation that Rosatom is involved in operation of. And this is why such nuances, such legal nuances, like having the contract signed with the licensed employees is a very important nuance for further economic operation of Rosatom beyond Russian Federation. And this is why it's important to understand that not only Rosatom is a representative of Russian Federation, that they're a government agency with the government share in their capital, but they're also a participant of the process of international nuclear law, and part of this nuclear law is safety through the safety of people who operate there, who are supposed to ensure such nuclear safety in such facilities. That's first thing. And the second thing is that since they are the big transnational corporation, they are subject to regulation by such a new aspect that emerged in the international law in the 90s as the guiding principles of the United Nations in business, specifically in such conflict when the facility is under jurisdiction of one state and another corporation which is in control of such facility cannot ensure the safety and security of the employees present there. For example, in case of Ukrainian control, we ensure the absence of war crimes there, but now that the Russian Federation doesn't allow us doing this, there is Rosatom who, according to different international conventions, is entitled to ensure such rights for the employees of Zaporizhzhia power plant and not initiate such crimes against them, which they do on contrary. This is why in this study that was made by Truth Hounds, based on this study, we see that Rosatom does not only ensure the security of unique licensed personnel of this nuclear power plant, but on contrary, they may initiate the war crimes in relation of such people. So this is the idea, to communicate the threat carried by this huge corporation incorporated into the huge number of international processes with the level of the threat for all the world. This is the nuance that we consider in this study. This is the specific idea we wanted to describe in this study. We were talking a lot about the liability of the state of Russian Federation according to the international humanitarian law before other countries and such country as Ukraine. But now we demonstrate the new aspect, the liability carried by this corporation in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And since we document war crimes since 2014, it helps to gather the facts for maybe unique situations. This is now we're present in this study today. Our organizations are parts of Initiative Tribunal for Putin, and we are called to demonstrate that it's not a single case of one representative of Rosatom or one Russian soldier. It's a systemic practice that calls for reaction of different international actors, starting from governments of the countries and all the way to such organizations as IAEA and all the contractors of Rosatom. This is why we call to all those entities how they could act in response to this dangerous situation. Mr. Dmytro, maybe you can add something about the study, and then we may proceed to the recommendations aimed at the international community. Yes, really, my colleagues have already disclosed a number of facts here. And we may say about the violation of human rights in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a layer, as a layer in the threshold of liability. Russia as a country has to bear liability for all the actions they committed in Ukraine. The individuals who represent Russian Federation should be brought to liability who were directly committing or conniving to the war crimes, but also the businesses should be brought to liability who are present in the occupied territory and who are involved in any types of crimes, like crimes against the property when the property is captured in the occupied territories. We've seen a number of examples like that in Crimea, in the east of Ukraine, and now all across the parts of Ukraine that ended up under Russian occupation. And now we see it as in the dimension of violent crimes, for example, in the case of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, when there are assaults of civil personnel of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant that have a shape of torturing or intimidation, but they are anyway serious violations of human rights which constitute war crimes. So now we talk to the audience and we try to communicate different levels of liability that is aimed to achieve the maximum effect from the cascade of justice, like government, individuals and businesses. So why we were interested in this aspect? Because when we try to build the approach in the criminal justice which is aimed at the casualties or victims, one of the underdeveloped features of such approach is the compensations. Where should they be coming from? And the approach based on identification of such violations on part of the business allows us to answer this question. We have where to get the compensations from when we talk about the violations behind which are businesses. They are the monies in the accounts of such corporations, and very frequently such assets are based abroad, like Ms. Alexandra has just mentioned. The assets of Rosatom are in different countries. Obviously, they are mostly concentrated in the Russian Federation, but they are present abroad too. Moreover, we may speculate whether some countries which are friendly or non-friendly, those who shelter such assets. But even when we talk about the countries which are friendly to Ukraine, the countries of the European Union and other friendly countries, frequently they one way or another cooperate with Rosatom because of its deep integration into global nuclear energy structure. And even if we don't talk about the full-fledged participation of Rosatom in any processes in those countries, they are still present in the aspect of financial transactions. And it allows us to seize those assets which end up in the territories friendly to Ukraine and to channel them for compensations to Ukraine. I will stop right there and then we may continue. Dmytro, is it safe to say that this study establishes the connection between Rosatom and all those crimes committed in the territory of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? Yes, definitely, it's one of the key goals of this study that we set for ourselves when we started to put in the data together back in April this year. We orient at the facts, not the speculations to describe the situation in general. We're not saying that Rosatom directly was planning or was committing, I mean the officials of Rosatom were initiators of tortures or inhumane behavior. What we're saying is that they were conniving. They were associates in a very specific way. They were legitimizing the presence. They were present at the spots where the acts of illegal tortures were taking place. So by their presence, they connived to such actions, legitimizing them thus. They were also helping, they were sharing information with the representatives of occupational forces, whether Armed Forces of Russian Federation or FSB, about the people who were working in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant who are unfriendly to Russian Federation. We have information that the employees of Rosatom were calling to those people who were earlier tortured to have them inclined to cooperation. I don't really like characterizing with the artistic means what's happening in Russia, I'm sorry. But it's difficult for me to imagine in Ukraine how we could see a situation like this when after tortures against an individual, the representatives of the corporation call you and they offer you a job in that same federation where those tortures were taking place. But we know about cases like this, so legitimizing their presence and conniving to the crimes, this is what makes the representatives of Rosatom the associates in these war crimes. And in general, the corporation Rosatom is liable for violation of human rights in the territory of the power plant, which from the point of view of Russian Federation is under control, under effective control of this business entity. Well, Mr. Dmytro, we know about these vacillations about bringing Rosatom to liability. So what are your recommendations for the international community to make sure that they are brought to liability and that the sanctions are imposed of this government corporation, which is discussed a lot in our society? So we proceed to the recommendations part. Well, alright, so the first recommendation is about the sanctions, something that you've asked about. So talking about sanctions, why Rosatom, why there was so much waiting to impose the sanctions on Rosatom? Because again, it's built into the global corporate system, nuclear corporate system, and to impose sanctions on them is like biting your own tail. But this logic cannot work forever. It may work, it may determine the geopolitical priority for the state, but then, seeing the new facts of violation by the company of their obligations, it will lose its actuality. It will lose it as soon as there will be security and business alternatives emerging for cooperation with other entities. And so it seems to us that this moment is coming, that it's coming closer, when more and more countries agree that the sanctions against Rosatom are long due, that they are supposed to be imposed, and there are less risks for such countries as they refuse the cooperation with Rosatom and to have it replaced with the cooperation with other business entities from other countries. It's not always technically possible, but where it's possible, there is such consensus maturing. We're citing the statement of the United Kingdom, who say that G7 have negotiations about the attempt to displace Rosatom from the global energy market. And this idea says that the sanctions should be of bilateral nature. They should punish Rosatom, first of all, for violation of human rights, and this is why the sanctions should be imposed. And on the other hand, the sanctions are an opportunity to deprive them of profits which can be spent for war in Ukraine. So our recommendation is take into account the planning of this advocacy campaign for sanctions against Rosatom, to take into account the fact that Rosatom is involved in mass atrocities such as tortures or inhumane behavior, and by such tortures and inhumane behavior, Rosatom violates the international humanitarian law standards by creating improper conditions for work for individuals who work in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So again, the mass atrocities on one hand, and through such mass atrocities they violate the international nuclear law related to the safety of operational conditions. So those are the additional arguments for those who would vote for sanctions against Rosatom. So what organizations should we appeal to, and what is the way of this study? Well, I think that meanwhile Dmytro is answering your questions, I want to just add a couple of words to what Dmytro has just said about the safety of operation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because those are the factors that influence not only us but the whole humanity. As Alexandra said, many employees of nuclear power plants, they are licensed personnel, and they have to renew their licenses on a semi-annual basis. Every time they come to the shift, they pass the medical examination, and if the parameters of their health do not comply with the standards, they may not be admitted to the operation of the equipment of the nuclear power plant. For example, if they have high blood pressure. And since in 1989 this nuclear power plant was built and commissioned, there are internal changes and modifications to the equipment of the nuclear power plant, and the personnel who work with those devices, they understand how the physical characteristics of the power plant are changing. And one of the victims whom we talked to, he said he was violently beaten. He was brought to the forest. He was forced to dig a grave for himself. Then his head was put in the plastic bag with the diesel fuel, and he works in the safety department of the nuclear power plant. How a person that was subject to such an inhumane behavior, how they can be responsible and ensure the safety of the operation of nuclear power plant. Thank you, Roman, for reminding me of this story. This is one of the, I would like to say, brightest, but in a negative sense, one of the darkest, probably, stories that we were able to document and to include in our studies. So talking about the organizations who we should appeal to, well, it's the same parties, the European Union, the United States, United Kingdom, the key players in the world who are courageous enough to impose the collective sanctions. And these are the entities we are supposed to work with to give them the additional arguments why the sanctions are long due. And what I would like to add, that in this case we have already the consensus and the opinion of the democratic world that yes, buying oil and gas for 20 years from a country where the human rights are not guaranteed, sooner or later it will result in high quality financing of some armed aggression. Like, this opinion is something that we have already established. But now we have to demonstrate, but it's not only about the resource parts, but also about such sophisticated technologies as the nuclear power. It's yet another step that Ukraine has the responsibility to make before the world. This is the unique situation, and in this situation no human dignity is included and no physical laws. Just what I mean is just to have a citizen of Ukraine with a unique experience replaced by a citizen of a Russian Federation to operate in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is not something that can happen. Just regular mathematics don't work here. The human capital of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is very important here. When they in terrible conditions, in the conditions of insufficiency of personnel, because those who leave, they cannot already replace those who stay there, and they can deter and ensure the safe operation of the nuclear threat on a global level. So it's important to communicate this information to the legal subjects who undertake decisions about the operation of the standards, because the nuclear law is already in place. And we should communicate this idea to the governments, because is the zone of responsibility of the governments, the operation of such nuclear facilities. So we should communicate this idea to the governments of the countries who are involved in possible process of sanctions. Thank you very much. Let's give the floor to our colleagues. And good morning, Kyiv 24, Yulia Machovich. Could you please tell us, based on the collected evidences from the employees of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, is anything known about the condition of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant? We keep hearing about the threat of it being mined. Do we have any information about that? Roman Dmytro? Well, thank you, Yulia. I think it should be me who answers your question. Generally, I think I will repeat my words. It's described in the text of the study that such behavior of the representatives of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in cooperation with the FSB servicemen who operate in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant results in the threat and danger in the nuclear facility being tolerated. A couple of days ago there was a report that there was a technical fault due to the fault of operator in one of the reactors, and to rectify that fault they started mixing the radioactive water from external counter with the water from the cooling pond, thus emitting the water contaminated with radioactive boron. If we measure the radiation there, we can see a little bit in compliance with the standards of radiation safety. It's not a huge threat, but we see how such policy results in degradation of the idea of nuclear safety, and to what extent Rosatom, who are in control of those standards, how negligible they are in relation to the standards. It's an obvious thing, like to switch the counters and to add some water to the cooling tube and to use the water from cooling pond there, thus contaminating it. Well, we wanted to take a more broad look at the problem, to include some things related to mining, to shellings that are reported by Ukrainian press very frequently, but we wanted to focus on that small but very important part about the internal conditions created in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I mean, the constant intimidation, the constant threat of tortures or illegal detention of the people, and we were staying in this paradigm. In our communication with the witnesses, we were told about the shellings and talking about the mining. I think it's clear that people who are on the lists of the pro-Ukrainian actors, they would not be admitted to the places of such mining. So we only heard about mining from the rumors. We were told more about the shellings, but we don't use the rumors. So we decided to use it to leave it beyond our focus. We are ready to share all such information with those who will study the attacks on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but we did not include such information in our report. More questions. Natalia Molchanova, Ukrinform. Good morning. I would like to ask you to express your opinion about who could influence the condition of the employees of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant so that no tortures are used against them, or can they be exchanged, like under some exchange process, like the prisoners of war, like the civil prisoners? Is there any specific legal status for them, or is it only possible to achieve through imposition of sanctions over Rosatom to change the conditions of their operation? Will it be of any influence on the condition of our employees there? I would like to say that the armed forces of Ukraine can directly influence the safety and security situation in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but maybe my colleagues have something to add. Well, I completely agree, and what I want to say that one of the key actors in the area of nuclear safety is obviously IAEA, and I think that they have certain influence. Obviously, it's limited, we should be realistic. International organizations don't have the armed forces, police, or other law enforcement agencies, but still they have influence, they have voice in the global level, they have authority. So probably IAEA should pay some attention not only to the physical safety and security aspect, but also to the safety originating from the atmosphere of intimidation, of the fright existing in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So if they use this aspect in their communication with Rosatom, it may change the communication in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And one of other recommendations that we use is the businesses that cooperate with Rosatom. I'm talking about the global agreement of the United Nations related to the businesses and the guidelines for the businesses. It says that the companies should observe the compliance with the human rights in the territory controlled by them, and if their partners do not adhere to the principles of the human rights and international humanitarian law, and it's our task to inform the businesses who cooperate with Rosatom that they end up under risk of improper due diligence and violation of human rights by their counterparts. So if Rosatom sees that it becomes more expensive to cooperate with any international entity through their behavior, it may change something in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, but it's clear that we may expect some cardinal, some strategic changes only upon the deoccupation of Energodar. A couple of details about our employees who stayed there. We know that there were about 5,000 employees at the beginning of the invasion who were ensuring the safe operation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Now the numbers say that it's about 1,000 of them staying there. So talking about your study, were you able to identify what is the scale of tortures used over there? Are they used against every single our employee over there, or only to the management personnel? What is the systemic policy that you were able to establish? Well, it's obviously the systemic approach, saying how many people were subject to such attitude. Well, you know, usually there are conversations between the representatives of Rosatom and FSB. After the shift, they call all of the employees from the shift, and they try to press on them to sign the contracts with Rosatom. Obviously, as I said in the beginning, we were able to identify for sure 30 people who were affected by the possible war crimes, where don't take into account intimidations. It's just the communication in such a way that you better work with Rosatom, because you will feel worse if you stay in this status. The mayor of Energodar gives us the number of 1,000 people. We understand that Energodar is the satellite city of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, and most of the residents are one way or another related to the operation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So one targeted people gathers a circle of friends and relatives around them who are all traumatized. So this is about the numbers. We know that there were cases of murders of the employees of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants. We did not investigate that specific case, but we state that there is one confirmed case of torture to death. We did not investigate it because our approach is not to re-traumatize the people affected by mass atrocities and not to repeat something that was documented by other entities. So if this fact is documented by the law enforcement personnel, we don't go there to communicate with the families who lost some of their loved ones. and other witnesses who were brought to the forest and the shooting was imitated, they said that they identified the recent burials in those spots. Most likely the law enforcement agencies of Ukraine don't have this information, but every witness we communicate to, we ask for their consent to disclose the information that is shared with us, and we also ask for their consent to hand over their evidences to the law enforcement agencies of Ukraine or foreign and international entities. We have more questions.
Yes, hi, my name is Luke Johnson. I'm an American journalist from the news outlet Public Sphere. I have two quick questions. One, the people who you spoke with, how did they escape the plant? Were they exchanged? Were they able to leave? And then my second question is, what do you think that the IAEA, if anything, can do about these human rights violations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke. I will answer your first question. The majority of the employees were able to live on their own with their families through the territories under Russian control. Usually the route goes through the occupied Crimea, then through the territory of Russia, through Baltic countries, and then they either come back to Ukraine or stay in the countries of European Union as refugees. This is the most widely used route that is used by the people, but there are a lot of threats on that way. Some of the people disappeared on the way, and still we don't know about their whereabouts because everybody is subject to the procedure of filtration imposed by FSB in every checkpost. And it's not only in the territories of Ukraine that are occupied by Russian forces, but also in the territory of Russia, where they cross the border with the European Union. There are evidences that the employees of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant were detained for more than 1 day by FSB personnel, and they were intimidated. I will not give you the exact facts of the intimidations because it may tie them to the specific people, but they were tipped off that if they go to the European Union, it doesn't necessarily mean that they may feel safe. And another question is about IAEA. Yes, Roman mentioned it in the very beginning, but I wanted to emphasize it again, that we were questioning also that we were interviewing the people who stay in Energodar too. Not all of those whom we communicated with, not all of them left. Well, and talking about IAEA, I could tell about my recipe for IAEA. They should assess the safety and security more broadly, and to add the situation with the human rights in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in their assessment, because based on the communication with the expert that we had, they are mostly focused at hard security, what they call it, like physical safety and security. But as Roman demonstrated from his example with the fault of an employee, this security and safety also includes a lot of soft elements, and it should exclude such things as intimidation by tortures and other types of violation of human rights. So IAEA should start talking about the human rights and to take into account those aspects during their assessment of the situation in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Thank you, dear friends. Do we have any more questions from the floor? Well, if we don't, I would like to thank all the panelists for the great job you've done, and I would like to wish the efforts that you take will result in toxicity of Rosatom for all the international community. Thank you, dear friends. Our next briefing is at 12 o'clock. Please stay tuned, and we want to thank our armed forces for opportunity to have events like this. Let's continue working for our victory, and glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Thank you.